Welcome to Shamanic Voices, a podcast aimed at bringing our ancient, indigenous Nordic wisdom traditions and perspectives, bringing these to bear on the challenges that we face in our modern world. I am your host, Georg, and we will often be joined by co-hosts, Laurie as our producer, and you can find our bi-monthly episodes on most major platforms. And if you enjoy this and like to read as well, please look up our blog with dozens of articles on health-related topics at teutonichealing.com. And now, let's get on with our show. This is Shamanic Voices. I'm Georg, and we have with us Laurie and Michalah, who have both had some interesting scrapes with black magic and can perhaps shed a little light on it, or a little dark on it, as the case may be. We often think about black magic. What does it mean? We hear the term thrown around. Negative magic might be a better way to put it. That which is, I guess we all engage in wishful thinking. We all engage in wanting things to be different sometimes than what we view physical reality or hardcore reality, three-dimensional reality as being. So perhaps we're always in some tiny childhood remaining corner of ourselves looking for something which can alter reality by wish alone or by thought alone. So perhaps that's a form of harmless magic. In the same way, we think of black magic quite often as where some person or persons actually intentionally aim negative thoughts, negative feelings, or even seek to have physical harm or situational harm done to another who does not conform to their wishes, does not bend to their will for whatever reasons that perhaps are known to them alone, or about whatever justification. So these are some of the ways we think about black magic or negative magic, magic which is manipulative, which is potentially harmful to the object of said magic.
How did you first learn about it, and what made you take it seriously?
Well, I just was interested in studying occult or say hidden, less well-known subjects from way back when. And I think the way I got into it was studying some, believe it or not, history of the space program way back, even in high school, about Jack Parsons, and coming across the fact that this founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and several of his associates were deeply involved with Aleister Crowley and other black magicians, and actually held regular black magic circles out there in the Los Angeles area, or I think a little north of that, around Caltech, Palo Alto maybe, where they were doing where the early space program was centered. So I started looking at it from the perspective, well, gee, did any other scientists, because he was certainly that, express an interest or have an interest in what we might call black magic or magic at all. And I found quite a few did. Nikola Tesla spoke of hearing from voices which gave him a lot of his ideas, his inspirations, and he attributed it to beings from Mars, but it's the same sort of thing, the idea of an extra-dimensional interference. Famously, also, Carl Jung had a time when he was younger of enlightenment, when he just suddenly felt like everything in the universe came together. He understood some sort of unified theory of behavior and so on. And I think this is where his idea of collective unconscious came from, and some of his other postulates, which, have been quite appealing to those researching how we tick ever since. And there was actually a book. I started digging a little deeper into Jung and found this book called Do What Thou Wilt, which was based on a life of Aleister Crowley, but it compared Crowley, who was a complete nutcase. I mean, the guy was nothing likable about him. I don't want to go into some of the grosser details of what he did or was represented in, but a similar experience had been had by other mystics Another one was the Irish poet William Butler Yeats. They'd all had an experience where they felt like some extra dimensional being, quite often diminutive being, similar to what we would consider a gray in the sense of the UFO phenomenon, come to them and bring them lots of information they otherwise would not have. So anyway, this is an interesting perspective to me. Does magic influence our lives? Do people do it? And then I started running across people in the human potential movement in the 70s and 80s. Not, I wasn't really a part of it, but I knew people who were in it, even researchers who were in it. It was pretty big around where I live, trying to research into how we would, by transforming our mental state, intentionally affect our outer reality. And this is tested a lot of different ways. A lot of it came out of military laboratories in the late 50s through 80s. There was a lot of research done by DoD laboratories checking this out, seeing how did we go about changing it. And of course, later on, then the whole manifestation cult comes out of this also. So all of these things I think are related. Black magic is a little different though, because it's saying, well, I'm going to atavistically throw all the rules aside. What's for the greater good doesn't matter. If it harms you, that doesn't matter as long as it benefits me. It was a completely narcissistic, or you might say very ego-driven concept of what magic would do.
So if someone's being attacked with black magic, does that mean someone's connecting with an extra dimensional being, or can it be done otherwise?
Well, I think like a lot of things, there's a certain amount of ourselves, a certain percentage of our own capacities, which is extra dimensional. Humans are able to alter things, and if they undo some of the societal programming against it, they can certainly manifest a lot of things like this. Take, for example, Wim Hof, the Dutch postman who is the master of cold and could, be out there in just his civvies and a t-shirt, sitting in snow at 20 degrees below zero and not show any signs of frostbite. That's a great example of, you might say, mind over matter. I would just say it's mind connecting with matter in ways that most of us don't connect with matter. If that's not magic, I don't know what is. Every rule of physiology would say that this guy should have severe consequences. And doctors examining Hoff right after he got out of a tub full of ice that he'd been in for 2 hours would be just shocked at how intact and healthy the guy was. So there's a lot to be said for that. Or does it require the existence of extra dimensional beings to do it? They certainly can play a role, just like we might pray for things that we think will help someone heal or help us do better in our own lives. If we believe in benevolent beings, as pagans, we do believe in benevolent beings who are overlapping with our material and human reality, but yet are separate from it and are transcendent. In the same way, there can be malevolent, malign beings who do the same thing, who are predatory or parasitic on humans, who, as it will, suck the soul essence or the living energies out of people. So I don't think I think magic is like a lot of things, it's neutral. It can be used either way.
So what exactly happens during an attack?
I think an attack probably begins, and I don't know because I don't do this stuff, but I can only try to flip it around and say what happens if I'm doing a healing. I will visualize a part of the body that's distressed. I will have a very good diagram in my mind from a lot of reading and studying as to how that part of the body should work. So when I project onto that person the blueprint, as it were, for how it should be healed, how it should look in its normal or healthy state, I want to see it move into that state. And I use my will, I think, simply as a carrier frequency to tie into the will as we understand it as pagans of the gods and goddesses who help us do healings and without whose help we could do very little ourselves. I'm not saying we couldn't do something, but we could do a lot more with their help. Now, if you flip that around and say, if someone wanted to do harm, they might visualize you're having a tumor. They might visualize you're having headaches, or you're being scared, or you're being in a mental, a hopeless mind state where you couldn't perform, where you were less of a threat to them and more malleable to whatever they wanted you to be. I think that's how black magic would start, with the person sending it, the person wielding that tool, or should I say that weapon, it would start with how they visualize the end result.
And I could also add not only the physical, but it can be emotional and mental, like where people have thoughts or emotions that are not realistic, but they can't explain where it's coming from. They're afraid, but they can't figure out where and why the fear came in. Somebody can feel in danger, but they can't necessarily touch what they're afraid of.
Well, sure, they could paralyze you with irrational fear, or render you relatively useless to living out your own agenda, your own objectives, your own desires, and therefore make you more malleable, as I just said, to whatever they're trying to achieve through you, or just to make you dysfunctional. They could certainly do that. If they had you hearing voices that weren't really there, then the risk would be that your companions, the people around you, would think of you as being schizophrenic, and you might start to doubt your own sanity, when in reality, these are being projected from somewhere else. That could certainly be done.
Several years ago, there was a woman that like you and I both knew, who wanted things and people said no to her. So she kept sending these thoughts to me that I needed to force people to do things a certain way. And at the time, I wasn't aware that that was even possible. So I didn't have any kind of defense up at all. And I spent a couple of weeks just walking around angry. Why don't people just do whatever this is? I don't even remember what I was supposed to be doing about it.
Yeah.
And then one day, I think I was talking to you, and you said, and removed whatever she did. And I went, oh, wow, there's my brain again. And so it scared me to think that someone could take over my mind and make me want to do things that I wasn't even clear about the goal.
Well, without even naming names, this was a coven, or grotto might be the proper word for it. I think they were not harmless, earth-loving Wiccans. Nothing of the sort.
So there was an agenda.
Yeah, these are hardcore. Well, and you know more about the agenda because they tried to get you into the group and what they stood for and so on. So why don't you go on a bit of some of the brainwashing that goes into getting somebody into a black magic gathering such as that?
Well, she started off by complimenting me on every little thing and telling me how special I was. And just due to my past, my guard went up a little bit there, but I saw it as childish. I never saw it as being as harmful as it was. And she kept trying to get me in. Oh, we need to get you this and we need to get you that. Let's get you on our website, and I'm gonna help you to really grow your business. And I was hesitant. And then her childish kind of, or the things I perceived as childish, started getting a little more dangerous. And then I just said, no, I'm not going to go there. Well, one of her favorite things was to control men. She liked to make sure that every man had a woman to be his puppeteer. And she tried to tell me that I should try to control my husband. And she said, oh, you just start by picking what he's going to wear in the morning, and you just send him the thought that he's going to wear an orange t-shirt. And when he comes out of his room wearing the orange t-shirt, you got him. And I said, we don't do that to each other. And, I couldn't live with that. And she said, oh, it's harmless. And so I just kind of backed out, and I never got any farther than that. So she didn't punish me too much. Other people who got fully into her program, you can't leave without having some severe consequences and having her tear your life apart from So she wasn't too bad to me other than trying to control my mind. Maybe because you were keeping her busy, she was trying to attack you. But
Yeah.
it
Well,
was quite an ordeal.
I didn't realize that she was that powerful or had that big of a following until she came down here, brought her son down here to have a healing and all that. And I thought about it later. I thought, huh, she really didn't want anything for him. It was all about trying to acquire new persons that she thought she could control. And then on the way back up to your area from mine, she had an awful car accident, called me immediately, asked me to help because she had a lot of symptoms from it. And I immediately tried to triage it like, what are the chances? This is before the EMTs arrived, before anybody got there. The car's off the side of the road burning. They got out of it, fortunately, quickly, and then it caught fire. And it was a really weird situation. So I tried to help her not have those issues. And then she went back to your area and fabricated this whole scene where she had floated herself, her husband, and her son out of the car and landed them on the roadside and did all these miracles in front of witnesses. Of course, nobody saw this because it didn't happen. They were just standing by the side of the road. These people stopped to help them. Then the EMTs came. But based on what she had pretty severe head injury because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And when the car was run off the road, and of course, she changed the story on that as to who was driving and all this other stuff. Anyway, she was thrown around a lot. Her husband was only slightly shaken up. Her son was in the back seat, bolted in. He was all right. But she received quite a few head injuries. And I, first of all, tried to get rid of the what appeared to me to be subdural hematoma and a lot of brain bleeding because her head had been struck all the way around by hitting the dashboard very hard, the top of the car very hard, so top of the head blow, etc. And so when she arrived at when the EMTs came by, they looked at the bleeding coming from the head in all sorts of places, severe lacerating injuries to the head, and took her right into the trauma unit. And the trauma unit, they speculated she might not make it and all that. And they were just surprised as hell to find that the brain was intact. There was no bleeding. There was no stuff. So she turned all of this around, made some story of it. At this point, I guess fearing that I would tell the truth next time I was up or next time I talked to you. The interesting thing is she had actually texted me what really happened and thanked me for saving her life, actually, in the text, as you might recall. So this sort of embarrassment could not be forgiven. So she started attacking me, trying to make sure that I and one of the people I was training at the time couldn't make it up there for our next clinic. And, the effect it had was she was trying to make me go to sleep on the road. That wasn't very effective. I was alert. I was fresh. I didn't have a problem that way. But I found these other vehicles were suddenly acting quite strangely, like somebody towing a car on a short bed wrecker, a lower down wrecker, not a real big one, swerved over to my lane radically while I was on I-65 headed north at about 70 miles an hour. And I just barely, there would have been time to even brake because I had somebody right behind me pretty close. I just was lucky and switched over to the lane left of me and missed this guy moving into my lane, right into my path. And I don't think he was conscious of what he was doing. And there was another time that happened further down the road. So I decided to take back ways, get off 65 to get there, which I did do, just to reprogram my GPS to give me an alternate route, because I could tell she was actually moving. And I thought, wow, that's some diabolical power right there.
So if she couldn't mind control you, she could mind control people around you.
I think that's what was happening, yes.
That's hard for me to even imagine. But
it was for me too. But it was just too much happening at once to be accounted for as a coincidence. And then when the fellow I was training, who was coming up to work with me at that time, got there, he had the same kind of thing happening to him all the way there from, a different direction. I was coming from south, he was coming from the northeast. He had exactly the same kind of experience, and they kept attacking when he was there. And I told him how he could fight back, so we did. And that seemed to end it, at least for that chapter of it. They kept trying a bit further, but eventually it's just a matter of the way we look at it. Magic is really out of our hands. We just try to take it to that kind of magic when it comes to justice between people. It's not for me to act on. We take it to the gods and goddesses because they see more than we do. They know more than we do. And I could miss something and make a bad judgment on somebody. They won't do that. So we asked for their visorship of it. And they took it on. And shortly thereafter, she and her husband and child left town. And the other, her female significant other also left town. And they had some mishaps along the way. I didn't program the mishaps. I didn't even visualize them. I heard about it later. So I guess that's the difference between white magic and black magic. All I wanted was to get her off her back, period. Nothing more, just you go your way, I go my way, we're good.
So for the average person who doesn't come across something that intense, how can we know when that we're being attacked versus just having a bad day?
I don't think you necessarily know. It's if somebody, because you see, one of the problems is people who can do this often have immense mental discipline, have very powerful trained minds, and they can control their outer demeanor so that you do not sense their hostility necessarily. They're not coming around out and saying, hey, I hate you, I'm going to destroy you. It doesn't work that way. The person who does that, you can kind of shrug your shoulders and say, man, I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't have any ill will toward you, and, slough it off. But the person who doesn't say it, but thinks it, that's the one you got to worry about.
So there's a lot of gaslighting involved.
I think there's a lot of different ways they could attack you, but they're going to, above all, try to hide their motives. I think that's a large part of what they do, not reveal what they're trying to do to you. But I would say that's a possibility. And it's not only going to be direct physical harm or mental harm. People doing black magic might try to get you to buy something. They might try to get you to go along with something that you just don't feel all that excited about doing. You don't feel all that coherent with. And
or they might give you a gift so that you have something in your possession that they can use to somehow. How does that work? Because I've seen that done.
Well, if you think about talismans, people have used talismans for years and years. Somebody wears a cross around their neck. Somebody else wears a Star of David around their neck. Somebody else wears a prayer hat or a prayer shawl like some of the Muslims do. There are a lot of different ways you can signify that you have an object around you that's supposed to tie you into a higher realm. But you could give somebody something kind of like the Trojan horse, where you send your power or what you may have actually invested that object with a harmful power, like a landmine, and when you interact with that object, then it blows up on you. It gives you the negative charge that they invested in it.
Now, is that because the object itself has changed or because of the recipient's belief in the object?
No, I don't think it requires belief. I think that's a common misconception. I think you might be more susceptible to it if you believe than if you don't believe, but it can harm you whether you believe in it or not. So I think that the object is the same object. It's just been used to store that charge like a battery and unleash it on you, either when they remotely trigger it to unleash on you, or when it's when it's set up like programming instructions to go off when you touch it, when you interact with it, when you pay attention to the object, maybe what's required. I don't know. Like I said, I don't do black magic, so there's a lot of the mechanics, the details that I wouldn't necessarily understand.
So what can we do just to be less vulnerable to things like that?
I think the main thing we do is just, first of all, shield yourself daily against any, let's not just say black magic or harmful magic, let's say manipulative, subliminal, or extra dimensional force being applied to you, whatever's trying to manipulate you. You know what you want, you know what you need, you know what's going on in the world. You need to figure that out for yourself. You don't need somebody else forcing a decision or an opinion on you. And anything you feel that's doing that, like you suddenly out of nowhere feel hostility towards somebody, or without any proof whatsoever, feel like somebody's trying to take advantage of you, think about it. Think, well, maybe somebody else is programming me to think that. So before I turn and accuse so-and-so, I need to rethink, is there any rational feeling for me to think? So something comes up that's irrational. There's no substantial evidence that this is the case. That's the point at which you should suspect some sort of manipulation. And then think, well, who would benefit by causing that? Causing a rift between two people, causing friction. Let's say you got a job somebody else wanted. They're peeved at you for getting it. In some case, maybe they say something negative behind your back to stop you from getting it, hoping to influence your employer to make another choice. But just as likely, if they're a black magician, they simply try to push the thought on you that you dislike your new boss and the job's trying to rip you off. They're trying to work you too hard, or they don't really respect you or don't really appreciate your contribution, etc. There are a lot of ways they could try to change you so that your actions then will detract from your outcome and you won't have the sort of career you were looking forward to having. There are a lot of ways they can pull that off. And so you have to ask yourself, wait, is there anything substantial to cause me to feel that way? Is there anything real that backs that up? Anything tangible, anything in this three-dimensional reality that supports that feeling I just had? If there's not, then you should go, wait a minute, who would benefit by manipulating me? And if you can think that somebody, maybe they let slip that they had a role in it, or that they had a feeling about it, that they don't want to, the crabs in the bucket phenomenon. They don't want to see you climb out of the bucket ahead of them. They've never found that satisfying career. They don't want you to have it because they couldn't have it. It can be as petty as that. It's not necessarily about some grand design. It can be really stupid, petty stuff behind it.
Like punishing you for getting the job when they wanted it.
Yeah. Just as a very simple example. Yeah. Or let's say that you're a young single lady and you're living in a city and you're in the same office as this other lady, and this guy who's in there who's kind of the catch, he's a really glib-tongued, nice-looking fellow, looks like Brad Pitt, and he's got good manners and he seems to be clean living and all that, and he's interested in you. And she hates the fact she's tried like hell to get his attention, practically thrown herself on the floor in front of him on an air mattress, and that didn't work. So she's gonna shoot you down, gonna interfere with your relationship with this guy. It could be just all kinds of silly, stupid things that cause people to resort to this, with the aim, of course, of turning reality around to where then they get the goal, they get the job, or they get the lover, whatever the deal may be.
Well, I think it's interesting what you said about people who do that having a very disciplined mind. It sounds like the best defense would be for us to also have a disciplined mind so we can defend ourselves.
Well, that's why shielding yourself is part of that disciplined mind. The other part is just, it may sound silly, but just regularly entering into prayer and meditation where you're contacting the other realms. And I think, Michalah, you were telling me the other day that that's been very useful to you, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Having meditation every morning so that I can join in and remember who I am and what I want to be doing to help humanity. Yes. And I place an amber stone in my solar plexus twice a day, about every 12 hours, and just see the energy going up and down and all around me. And that shield, as you're talking about, protecting me. Yes.
Excellent.
Salt baths work really well too. So sometimes when the thoughts like you're talking about, you're going for a job, but somebody's jealous that you're doing the interview and you got the job. And so they're sending negative emails and negative texts against you. And then you have these crazy thoughts of, am I really worthy for the job? Well, when that negative, am I worthy? Am I lovable? And these are not my thoughts. Taking a salt bath, with sage oil, different oils for cleansing negative energy, watching the water go down the drain, see ya, and be clear.
Hey, let the sage and coriander carry it off, right?
Yes. Yes, and just being grateful and thankful, to the gods and goddesses that I've got a bathtub and I can do it. And you definitely feel much better afterwards.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. If you're living in gratitude, uh, you're not out here all alone. You've got air support and artillery back there behind you. You've got these other assets. You're not just carrying a rifle, one lone infantryman. You don't want to be that person. And that's a hard thing to communicate to people who don't have a spiritual orientation. Sometimes it's important to tie into benevolent off-world or off-dimension beings to help you. I think one of the things you just pointed out was really good, and maybe I haven't emphasized enough, but it's not always going to be exterior events or outcomes sending you the negative thoughts that you would resonate yourself, like, am I really worthy of this? Do I really deserve this? Am I really equal to the task? All of that self-doubt and self-loathing, that can be part of it too, because nothing would be more debilitating than a perpetually negative mindset. So just sending you that mindset in a lot of fields would make a difference. And so you have to always question, I think, if you are ordinarily a progressively oriented individual, disciplined and purposive in your actions, something that's discordant, something that doesn't really fit, that's not you. If that pops up in your mind, you just wake up suddenly, oh, life is bleak and everything sucks. Ask yourself, is that really me talking? Is that thought really my own, or is that sent by somebody else? And then think, who would benefit from that? Who would want to see me having a more difficult life? How would they benefit from that? And if you're getting that sort of vibration coming in, there very well may be somebody behind it, and you may soon think of who that would be.
I think another thing someone can do is they can take a part of you that's already there that's negative. Let's suppose somebody knows that you have a tendency to be depressed. They can magnify your depression.
Oh, yeah.
So you won't recognize that it's coming from outside of you.
Sure, they could pray. And this is one of the things black magic often finds the place of least resistance. If somebody's sending you ill health and you tend to have arthritis, you're probably going to have the arthritic attack from hell, where your knees hurt all day long and your back hurts all day long and your neck hurts all day long. And like it did yesterday, when somebody attacks you, and it could go on for quite some time. And when you see it as being an anomalous event and ask for it to be removed spiritually, and suddenly it lifts, you know that it was, in fact, an attack. So that would be the physical manifestation. The same way mentally, if you tend toward a dysfunctional mindset or a mood disorder, truly, whether it's a depressive episode or a manic episode or whatever form it takes, if you can question it, you're halfway toward getting out of it. And question, is this really mine? Is this really coming from me? Or is this being sent from outside? I think that's a good start. Is don't just take for granted what you feel. Realize that it may be projected onto you. We think of all kinds of cases where people try to send messages to each other and successfully project it. I remember astronaut stories about that, and even in the Russian Psywar program, they had somebody in a Faraday cage, like way across the country, somebody else in Siberia projecting thoughts to this person. I think it was a specific, I forget what it was, but it was something very concrete, definitive, certain tasks, certain thoughts that were very specific, that weren't general and wouldn't be triggered by the immediate environment. The other person is just in a quiet place, but they're not in a Faraday cage. The person in the Faraday cage got the thoughts just fine. What they were looking for was, is this an electromagnetic phenomenon? And at that point, they had to conclude, well, yeah, we do have certain electrical impulses, really micro voltages going on in our bodies, but we're not basically electrical beings. Much of our messaging is chemical in nature. And certainly as far as trying to send thoughts, we're not sending electromagnetic energy.
So in other words, there's no tinfoil hat we can wear to protect ourselves.
Yeah, I don't know if tin would work or not. Maybe a kryptonite hat. I don't know. Might be a little heavy though.
We have to discipline our own thoughts to block out stuff that's not ours.
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. Just practicing what you could say is mental hygiene.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Whereas I think a lot of people have, I'll just pun here and say mental logene, low genes, instead of dwelling on the negative or the salacious or whatever. So I think those are aspects of it.
So if suppose someone was to have the sudden realization that they're being attacked, like, oh, I have all these thoughts in my head that aren't mine, what's the best thing to do about it at that point?
Well, I think the first thing I would do literally is to objectify it. I would just take a piece of paper and write down, I have this impression, I have this thought, I have this thought, and then look at it in your own personal history. Did I have these thoughts last week? Did I have these thoughts in the last few days? What happened? Who was I in contact with? Who might have benefited by sending me these thoughts? What subtle hint of somebody's disappointment in me or displeasure with me might have motivated somebody to send these to me? How would they benefit if they did? Start thinking about cause and effect, because that's exactly what they don't want you to do. To be a good little victim, you don't think about cause and effect.
So then that would cripple the thought.
It certainly tends to override it. Yeah. It creates a lot of interference with it. But then the main thing is just to look at it and say, okay, is this realistic? Because quite often it's not really realistic at all. I mean,
I think that works on a small scale, like if it's someone who's sort of an amateur, but when you get the heavily dedicated black magicians after you, it's a little more difficult than that.
Well, you have certainly experienced the dedicated, heavy-duty black magicians. Why don't you share a little bit more what that was like?
Oh, which time?
Well, think of the more recent one that's been going on that you and one of our other associates had happening for over a year.
Well, let's see. I could start a little over a year ago. I was driving and I heard his voice in my head telling me things that I knew that weren't true. And I, because it was so blatant, I recognized it in the moment. And I pretended to agree with the voice because I figured he was probably connected to me and listening to my thoughts. And then as soon as I felt the disconnect, I said, nope. And I think I told you about it as soon as I could, but shortly after that, I got a phone call from this person asking me, so how are you feeling? And I said, oh, I feel fine. Why? Well, then I felt this strange tingle in my spleen area and later found out I had cancer. So I've been dealing with cancer for 8 months now? We're on month 8 and the cancer's gone. That's great. But once in a while, this same individual wants something from me, and then I just get up in the morning and the first thing I think is, why am I alive? And all day it's just depression hitting me so hard I can't think straight. And I feel like he's punishing me for not giving him what he wants. But and to me and there was one time when I had a text exchange with this person, and he was disappointed because he wasn't really reading the text, and he sent me this frustration and anger, and I laughed at it. I was like, oh, I remember thinking, oh, is that all you got? Sprayed myself with some salt and coriander and just went on with my day. It wasn't a big deal. But it's a little bit harder when he sends me this depression because it's more subtle in a way. It's not a sudden hit, and I don't realize right away what's causing it.
Well, I would say in a way what you just described is less than a real master black magician. Been a master black magician, you would have experienced, it wouldn't have been his voice in your head, it would have been your own voice in your own head, experiencing it as your own thoughts. Yeah, you wouldn't have been able to tell that it was coming from an external source. When they're really good at it, they can do it that way.
Ooh.
Like, oh, so-and-so is really using you and putting you down and everything. Well, exactly what do I have that verifies that substantiates that? Nothing. Where is this coming from then? And if you back up from that perspective, is there a real world justification for this feeling I suddenly have? And I'm being made to be angry at somebody for something that's not really happening. Who benefits from that? Who would have a motivation to do that? Usually you'll think pretty quickly who that would be. But you don't want to be thinking conspiratorially all the time. So the main thing is one of the things you have trying to not be a victim of black magic, you have the power of refutation. You can refute it. You can send it back. You can say, no, this is not my thought. I don't think that way. Or you can even examine the thought, question the thought. What is there that you say that so-and-so is such and such, you say, whatever, life is not worth living. Well, just think about it for a minute. Think about all the people you've touched. Think about all the people you've helped, all the people who've thanked you for your help, all the people who've praised you for your skills. You know, hold on. The evidence is the other way. This is not my thought. This is not rational. This is just as irrational as the person walking around in the old cartoons of the 50s, dressed up like Napoleon with his hand in his waistcoat, thinking how important he is. It's just the opposite version of that. It's the depressive side of the manic depressive cycle. And this person's greatly exaggerating it, what they used to call the manic depressive cycle. So it's just as irrational to be depressed or angry without cause as it is to be elated without cause.
Well, I had another example last summer with a completely different person who had been targeting me for several months. Someone else you also know, but he'd been targeting me for several months, kind of, you know, like a narcissist, and, you know, trying to make me live his narrative. Then I just kept ignoring him. And then one day he blew up in my face and started screaming at me, and I thought, wow. I wonder what that's all about. This is crazy. And I just kind of went on with my day and didn't think much of it. And he called me later in the day to tell me that he didn't want to talk to me anymore. And I said, you know, I think that's the first thing you've said all day that I can agree with. So a day or two later, I heard this little voice coming from what was probably an extra dimensional being, a gray or something, trying to get me to pick a fight with my husband over a really petty thing. And I heard the little voice. I just said, I'm not doing that. And
Good for you.
And then a couple of days later, the little voice comes back and says, you know, you're right and he's wrong. And I said, I don't care if I'm right and he's wrong. I'm not going to start a fight over that petty little issue. Well, sure. And the issue was over a little bush that was outside that had died. I called it the dead stick. And I said, it was dead. Why don't we dig it up? And my husband wanted to save it because it had a little baby leaf on it. And I said, okay, you know, I'm not going to argue over a dead stick. Well, next thing I know, about a week later, I noticed little chew marks, like an animal had been chewing around the edge of that dead stick. And I looked out the window and I said, that's odd. And my husband actually believed that I got out there with a shovel and damaged it. And so he walked out there and put his hand on the dead stick and just pulled it straight up out of the ground. It wasn't even connected anymore. And I said, I didn't do that. And he was mad at me for a while because he was just sure that I did. And so I sat down with him and I told him about the person that had yelled at me, someone else he knew, and told him the voice I heard. He still didn't really believe me, but I'm like, look, I didn't touch it. You pulled it out and it was disconnected. And I said, I don't have an explanation for that. And
well, when the roots rot, you can pick the top of the plant up off the aerial part off the ground. So clearly,
well, would it be possible then for one of the grays to get an animal to go gnaw around, because it was chewed?
It may be. I don't know if it was a gray or not.
Just to get us to fight.
In case of the individual you're mentioning, yes, I know this was a cult.
And he did have a reason for us to fight. He would have benefited from that.
It was a cult-like setting where this guy's posing as a self-help movement, but in reality, it's something very, very different. And that's unfortunate because it had a lot of potential as it was presented to me as a self-help movement. Really unfortunate to see it go that way. I wouldn't really call it black magic per se. I don't think he was tied in with other consciously with other dimensional beings. I feel like this individual is occupied by them that drive a lot of his addictions. Okay. And he'd have to become aware of them and refute them, get them out of his life to overcome those addictions. But I wouldn't call him a conscious, but we're talking about a very undisciplined mind. But when you open yourself up through extreme drug abuse, as he had done, and as the other black magic practitioner you mentioned had done, that can open channels to other dimensions where beings like that can, how would I say, enter your inner space and use you and let you think you're the top dog by sending power to somebody else when they're actually using you to do it.
So is that similar to I've heard of therapeutic sessions where people will use some kind of drugs to put you in an altered state to get rid of addiction. Of course, that's in a more controlled environment. Is that similar? It's just that it's not controlled. And
well, this is not controlled, and it's just where you're wide open. You haven't set any perimeters. You haven't set any expectations in the therapeutic use of, as shamanic work has done for millennia. The person would fast, meditate. In the case of the Bitwi people of the Cameroon, they would then dance for hours and hours with no food or drink, just to get completely exhausted, work off all the negative energy, work off all the, and also a counseling session would quite often be offered with an elder, same way in our tradition, where you're anything that is causing anxiety, anything that is causing any lower emotions, fear, whatever that's on the edge of your consciousness, you want to deal with that and at least make peace with it and say, well, this is the reason I feel fear of that. Maybe it's not rational, but that depotentiates it, that removes it from having power over you. Because otherwise, when you open those doors through what, of course, Aldous Huxley called the doors of perception, through ingesting or smoking or whatever form that entheogen, those forces can become much larger when the conscious you, the governing ego, is not in place.
And another door to open is the pornography world.
Oh, God, yes. Good point.
That's a great big open door for black magic to use that door to woo people.
Well, the Institute said pornography. I started thinking of another thing, which is related in its attempt, and that is all these young men who spend hours and hours, maybe some young women do too, on these war games where everything's a battle and everything's me versus them, etc. And that kind of gives you a worldview that's not exactly the way things work. I mean, the best life is where you're cooperative and cohesive with others. And, you're not out there as a lone wolf seeing everybody else as a rival. If you have that mentality, that can set up a really negative chain of events. For one thing, you're not going to be much of a team player. You're not going to be able to work with others to achieve common goals, and therefore to hold what's known as a job. It could be a problem in a lot of ways for you if you actually believe that way. But yeah, pornography, gosh, I think it does a lot of harm. It causes the males to consume it overwhelmingly. I've seen females absorb it also. It just gets everything down to the most base forms of copulation and or perversions. When I say perversions, I mean things like foreign objects, animals. Use your imagination or don't use your imagination there, but just things that can be pretty bad, or sadism, masochism, whatever. And I think it opens those doors. And who knows what kind of entities would ride in on those open doorways. You shudder to think they wouldn't be wholesome, they wouldn't be positive, they wouldn't be life-affirming, which sexuality should be life-affirming. It would be very different.
I could see that in the pornography, but I think in the video games, it's a little more subtle and a lot more accepted. So, I mean, we have almost a whole generation of people who've grown up just obsessed with these video games and can't pull away from it. They now see video games as a basic need.
Well, I think this is a form of mass magical mind control. It's taking, especially young persons. I think of a formerly good friend who does this all the time, every spare minute himself, and we got in a bit of a tiff over it because I told him his two sons were pale skinned, never got out in the sun, never got outside and played, or very rarely, maybe once a week they go to the park when they live in basically a park, beautiful rural setting, and they're on the damn thing every minute. They're not doing schoolwork or house chores. They're on the widescreen TV, which he had set up just for them with their own controllers doing all this stuff. So all the things that a kid might be learning that you've learned in Scouts, like how to tie knots, how to mend your clothes, how to fix your bicycle. I mean, stuff that may sound really mundane. These are important things of learning how to cope with life and its emergencies, how to balance a checkbook, how to do, just take the word how to and fill in what you like. All that time is being spent helping the Venusians conquer the Tribastrians or whatever, these make-believe things, or fighting King Kong on the widescreen, or fighting Godzilla or whatever. Just these trumped up battles, which they get a certain dopamine hit out of it, they certainly do. But the problem is the life skills are being not learned at the same time. And wouldn't that have been a better expansive experience taking a hike up in a national park instead of glued to that damned 6x4 screen for hours?
Yeah, this has been a problem for quite some time because 15 years ago, I was in Boy Scouts with my sons, and my kids didn't have nearly as much gaming time as other kids did. And the leaders of the Boy Scout troop, when they were at camp, they said no devices. If you bring your phone, we're gonna put it in a lockbox. And the kids acted lost.
Good for them.
They just didn't know what to do. And somehow our troop was the only one that locked up devices. The other kids were allowed to have their phones and things on the camping trip, which made it useless.
This is the mass mind control, which is, and basically, even if it was not a malevolent message, whatever the messages are in that mass media, if you have to consume media written by other people rather than go experience life for yourself with your own devices, using your own mind, your own body to navigate your world, then you're missing a lot. You don't learn to navigate your world very well. And I think our associate who was in the training call with us yesterday brought this out vividly, saying that where she works, these idiots would come in thinking that they had a right to be on their cell phones all day long in a high threat environment where if you're not alert and you're not paying attention, you could make your day or make somebody else's day at the same time. Where you really want to be alert on your game. So this is where
I remember she said that some of these kids come in, they don't last more than one day before they just quit.
And this is with primo jobs with great benefits, great salaries, great benefits. No reason you wouldn't want to work at it, So this is unfortunate. So if there's a black magic involved there, it would be the black magic of maybe relatively harmless stories on these video games or video explorations. But by tying somebody up in a fantasy world all the time, and actually this was warned about around the turn of the 19th century by Miguel de Unamuno in, let's see, Sentimiento Trágico de la Vida, The Tragic Sense of Life. I read it in Spanish at the time, but I was having to think of the English translation. And he was I don't think he was a Catholic theologian, or I don't think he was an actual practicing priest, but he was an academic and a theologian. And he wrote about, he was seeing it already with people living in novels and living in cinema. Even at that early time, people would just get to the cinema every chance they had. Of course, it got way worse after TV, where people just plop down and they're in somebody else's drama that somebody else wrote. This is also a form of black magic mind control, just neutering your ability to think for yourself and even just the choice of picking a book, deciding what you want to learn about. And don't just always make it fiction, make it nonfiction as well. So you're actually learning something about how things tick, how things work with whatever you read. But just
so it's kind of a large scale of the people being controlled by giving them an addiction.
Yes. Well, and if you think that the source of happiness and entertainment, enlightenment, and even communication has to come from outside of yourself, and has to be something you pay for and subscribe to, whether it's at the cinema in the old days or listening to the radio all the time or TV or whatever the form is, you're in serious danger of losing your ability to evaluate matters on your own and connect with life on your own. And you're probably ignoring things that you could have done. You could have spent that time exercising, gardening, developing a craft, building something with your hands that you can look at later and feel proud of, and connect with other people by doing when they buy it, when they see it, when they appreciate it, when they use it. These are healthy ways that in the healthy human village that we would relate to one another. And if
It
we're
reminds
just
me of a family I knew once where the parents actually used addiction to control the children. And so their child at the age of 25 could barely get out of bed in the afternoon, and so they used the learned helplessness to keep their kid home, so they knew where he was. And he had no living skills, just nothing. I mean, it had the mentality of a 7-year-old in his mid-20s, and I thought I'd never see that again, but I have a neighbor right now who's the same way. And it's just, now we have this epidemic of this kind of stuff, with everybody getting so into these video games, and everyone's got to have cable TV, and so we're all dependent on the government to do our thinking for us, because all we do is binge watch Netflix and
a lot of them don't
whatever.
realize that a lot of those films you see were only produced because they had a substantial grant from DOD. And the access to the military base where that was made was because you agreed to advance the propaganda of DOD. I'm not saying DOD or DOW, as they call it nowadays, is always wrong or always evil, but the fact is it's coming from a centralized thought form, a centralized fountain of thinking, and going out to you. You're not thinking for yourself. You're not going and reading or listening to a foreign broadcast to say, hey, what's really going on in the Middle East? What's really happening? What would a neutral pro-Western Arab country have to say about it? Things you might want to think about. You might want to look at both sides of the picture before deciding what's really happening somewhere. Just as examples, investigate reality on your own. Look for multiple sources of information. Weigh it. Judge it on your own, instead of having a pre-digested formula handed to you through the nightly news or through whatever media you're following, or through entertainment disguised as, I would say, propaganda disguised as entertainment, where it has a particular outcome that's pre-decided, and you're participating in that so that you can be entertained. That's a form of black magical manipulation on a grand scale.
So it sounds like whether it's subtle manipulation or intense manipulation that's more direct, the solution to it is to be aware and exercise critical thinking.
And to live in your fullest potential, to live in your own individuality, rather than, because what these exterior sources are doing, they're filling in blanks in your own development. They're satisfying areas of yourself which you have not claimed for yourself. Let's look at the whole idea of the talisman again. Let's take it a little bit differently. You mentioned when somebody gives you an object, how about the person who sees ads again and again and again? Maybe they see it on a billboard, maybe they see a display at the store. They sure as hell see it on TV or even on YouTube or some other place on the internet. And they walk in the store, boom, there's that object. It's suddenly imbued with the subconscious power to lift you out of your circumstance, to provide you with some sort of power or do something for you, make you more attractive to the other gender, whatever the hell it's supposed to do for you. Magically, if you buy this, such and such a good outcome happens. Well, that's a damn talisman. It's way beyond what the object can actually do.
Makes sense.
One time, a friend of mine said, perfume commercials were horrible. And she said, have you ever noticed the actors and actresses that, portray perfumes? They're adolescents. And so what is the theme there? If I use that perfume,
Eternal
I'm
youth.
sexualized down to youth. Well, I'm not a pedophile. Why would I look at and sexualize an 11-year-old or 13-year-old and wearing this perfume? And it was cause to think about that. That's true.
That's true. You don't see mature people in ads for objects that are supposed to enhance our appearance usually, which I think is they're kind of missing the point in a way, is you have whole generations where there are more and more baby boomers and fewer of the younger generations are, top heavy demographics in a lot of advanced countries. You would think they would give you an example of an attractive, good looking person who is in more advanced years, somebody who's basically ages like Catherine Deneuve or somebody like that, or Sean Connery, who's considered very attractive even as he got older, and you just don't see that. They're always pick someone, and even I remember seeing something when my kids would briefly watch these TV shows in the afternoon aimed at them for when they got home from school. And again, we had very limited TV budget, but on that budget, I just sat and watched it with my daughter one time. What was the overall thing with this video? Aha! I know what real teenagers look like. None of these guys had pimples. None of these gals had baby fat. They were getting 25-year-old actors and actresses to dressing them and making them act like teenagers. Those who had more baby faces didn't have any lines yet. That's what they were putting out there. So it's offering some sort of escapism, to look at that. So either way, it's a matter of taking you out of your own experience and putting you in another place. And to some extent, storytelling, entertainment, escapism has its place in the human story, but it shouldn't be every day all the time. If you take, and that's very addictive the way it is now. If you take in the village or in the Neolithic, relatively well-adjusted suburban or rural or trading community, which is partially trading, partially crafts, partially agricultural, partially shipping or transporting, you would hear about a troop coming to town that's going to be puppeteers. In maybe a month, it's announced. Somebody comes through, the town crier posts it on the message board, wherever that happens to be, and you see it and say, oh, great. 3 Thursdays hence, we'll be able to go see such and such. Or there's a play coming down, or there's an opera. It's something you did once in a while. It was a big deal. You used your imagination because you were doing it once in a while. No one thought that theater would be an everyday occurrence. And then you have to ask, who is writing the script? Who is setting up the plot lines, the storylines? What messages are they giving you through this? Big difference between where you heard music once in a while played by a live musician. Maybe it was a troubadour, maybe it was a traveling musician, maybe it was some guy who came to the local pub and was renowned as a good balladeer. Okay, fine. It wasn't an everyday thing. You got to think about what he said and whether it applied to you or not. You weren't bombarded with it constantly, like people who have to be entertained all the time. So what we have is an addiction to entertainment, which takes us out of our own lived reality. And that's going to be a problem. Because if we're taken out of our own reality, we're not living it effectively, nor are we perceiving it effectively or accurately.
And then
now, again, who benefits?
Critical thinking and sense of autonomy, which makes us more susceptible to whatever message anyone wants to float our way.
Absolutely. So I think we can too narrowly think of black magic as a person with a grudge, taking a voodoo doll of you and sticking a pin in it. And that's certainly part of it, but it's a lot bigger than that.
And it can be very subtle, like
yeah.
A form of black magic can be something where you could have a married couple and the one is depriving the one spouse of sleep on a regular basis. And as that consistent, when you deprive a human body without sleep, okay, well then it takes away their functioning during the day, cognitively, getting through the day, physically, and then they're more susceptible to listening to the negative, or being controlled or manipulated. And then when you finally get down to the root and realize there's a constant sleep deprivation issue going on.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it black magic. That's just overt hostile action against another. Not by directly reaching out and hitting her, but by just making the environment such as toxic. And the more sleep deprived you are, there's actually been tests done where officers who, like highway patrol people, is actually done with some behavioral scientists in attendance as well. They took subjects who had been drinking and subjects who had simply been deprived of sleep. And the ones seriously sleep deprived didn't score any better than those who were drunk on tests for the sort of skills that would be, the psychomotor skills that would be involved in driving. They were just as wobbly, just as bad of a slowed reaction time as you would have if you'd been drinking. So that is certainly one way you could affect somebody. But see, that's kind of an overt thing. When we speak of black magic, we're speaking through non-physical, through subtle means being influenced. Like if you were given troubling thoughts at night to keep you from going to sleep without a lot of noise, that would be the same kind of thing.
And that fear of danger. Oh, I can't get to sleep because I'm in danger.
Yes, and that could be projected also. But then again, it could be your own realistic perception of danger because you're living in a dangerous situation and your subconscious is screaming at you, hey, we need to get out of here. This is going to get bad if we don't. Well, those are interesting corollaries to explore about where the boundaries are, where it's actually black magic or just negative people with negative programs that you're having to deal with.
True. Another one could be the evil eye. You walk by somebody in the store or outside and they're, snarly at you and their eyes are glaring.
Yes.
So there's another example. Somebody throwing an evil eye and you just
well, the more of an empath you are, the more mirror neurons you have, and as an empath, which you are, you're going to start internalizing it quickly, just like a very rapid response on the computer, shifting through all kinds of alternatives. Why does this person feel that way? And you'll start mirroring that, or mirroring the other side of that, which is this person's looking at me offensively. I start feeling like I need to be afraid. Mm-hmm. Or you look right back at them, okay, you want some of this? But either way you're participating. The best thing is just to look the other way, like, okay, I didn't see that.
So I guess it's a similar discipline personally, no matter which way it is.
Yeah.
Because I've also had times where I was talking to someone who was really hurting, and then I pick up on their emotions, and I know they don't mean to throw it my way.
Right.
Sometimes it'll sit with me for a couple of days as if I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and hear it. And I have to say, okay, that's not mine. And I don't know why I'm holding on to it, but.
Well, that can be slightly productive as long as it doesn't overtake you. If you meet with a client or a patient, depending on how severe it is in your practice, and they present an apparently intractable problem, and you think about it later, you think, wait a minute, that's the core of what this is. It's not what they presented. They didn't give you the fact, and then next time you see them, by the way, did such and such happen to you? Have you had this kind of experience? And then you get to that perspective, you start to help them peel off the layers and see what was really causing it. You can help it change. There's a difference between that and owning it as your own,
Mm-hmm.
Just keeping it as a problem you failed to solve at the time and you're solving it later. It's all right to do that, but there's the difference between the two. If you're feeling it like they feel it, that's paralyzing. So we need to think about this in terms of black magic. Of course, we have a group getting together to curse another group. And I think when Donald Trump got elected in 2016, there was some sort of Wiccan group. I guess they were really far lefties somewhere that was actually trying to put a hex on his presidency. It was public news at the time. Mm-hmm. And that is just very misguided. But you see that happening. And again, on the flip side of it is when you think about white magic, think of all the times when some sympathetic figure becomes ill or becomes disabled, and all these people are sending thoughts, prayers, wishes for he or she to get better. Classic example would be when Ronald Reagan got shot with an exploding bullet next to the heart at age, what was he, 72 or 73? I forget which, something like that. And barely made it. But, all these people were wishing him well. I think that's one of the reasons he did make it. So those are all
important for us to keep positive thoughts.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons.
And above all, the thoughts that you put out there attract people and events to you. If you go out there expecting to be mugged, you're actually more likely to get mugged. If you expect to be robbed, you're more likely to actually get robbed. not less. I'm not saying don't prepare for it. I'm not saying don't keep a proper piece behind the counter if you're a store owner that will answer to somebody walking in the door with a deadly weapon. That's just sound planning. But if you go in there expecting it every day, you're actually more likely to invoke it. Your vibration becomes consonant with the vibration of the person who would abuse you that way. Whereas if you take the outlook that basically I'm grounded, I'm in my discipline, I'm in my faith, I am very hard to mess with, I'm aware of what is mine and what isn't mine, then it's something you don't have to worry about a lot. When you see it, you can react to it. But if you go around thinking, well, I'm a victim, I'm in danger of this all the time, it's actually more likely to happen to you. So the quality of our mindset probably has a lot to do with avoiding it. Well, you've been listening to podcast 37 of Shamanic Voices with Laurie and Georg and our guest host, Michalah, helping us figure out and kind of navigate the murky waters of black magic. I hope you've enjoyed this, and we may do a second part of the same topic at some point in the future. We're trying to be monthly. We've had a little hiatus where we had some technical internet problems. We're just back now with Teutonichealing.com. So you can go look up our podcasts, our blog, all the other stuff we have on there. And we appreciate you tuning in and listening. So from all of us to all of you, go with the gods. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Shamanic Voices. Please like and subscribe so that you won't miss our coming episode, where we always try to have engaging and interesting topics and or guests. Thank you, and go with the gods.